Hiring managers over it. What red flag did you miss or ignored during an interview that ended up costing you later? I actually hired someone who was late for the interview. Her apology was totally reasonable and I looked past it because she seemed like a good fit. A few weeks into the job it came out that she didn't know what time zone we were in. That's not the reason she was late, but it did turn out that her understanding of time and clocks was insufficient for a job where scheduling things across time zone was a primary responsibility. Her understanding of time and clocks was insufficient. Oh man, that's gotta be one of the best phrases I've read in this thread. Without getting in specifics, other than 3 years litigation on sexual misconduct by the entire staff, we finally got the state government to allow us to put must be comfortable in a work environment that has open discussions of sex and drug use for a position in the HIV STD prevention. One applicant had this weird, sort of arrogant body language during the interview, but because they looked great on paper and otherwise interviewed okay, I wrote it off as anxiety or something. Joke's on me, because that person ended up being the whiniest, snottiest, bitchiest, most vile individual. Thank God they found another job before I had to let them go. This is going to be kind of a left turn, but the thread could use a bit of positivity. When I was working for my stepdad's trucking company, I did a little bit of every part of operations, dispatch, finding new accounts, hiring and firing. It was just a matter of who was available at the time to do the task. One day a guy comes in asking if we are hiring drivers. I inform him that we are and ask him to have a seat while I grab an application. He stops me and says, "Before you bother with that, I have to ask a question that could save us both some time. Do you hire felons?" To which I replied it would depend on the felony. Voluntary manslaughter. Oh crap. Come to find out the guy had done a 10-year stretch in the state pen. Some guys tried to rob him. He shot one in self-defense. There was some fuckery with witnesses. Dude couldn't afford an attorney. Public defender talked him into plea bargaining down to manslaughter so he wouldn't do life. He had his case file with him. I glanced through it while he filled out the application. Sent him for a P test same day. He was one of the best drivers we ever had. He was where he was supposed to be, when he was supposed to be there. Never bitched. Never caused any problems. Model employee. I'd hire 10 guys like that in a heartbeat. Literally the opposite of the question, but upvoted because the world needs more people like both of you. A couple of 17-year-old boys were dropped off by their father in a compact, red Porsche convertible, not that it's relevant, with frozen yogurt cups in their hands. The older one walked up to the desk and, with freaking Froyo in his mouth, asked, "Can I get an application?" The brothers spent almost half an hour eating frozen yogurt, laughing and joking with each other, and filling out that application in our lobby. It was maybe a 5-minute application. When they handed their applications to me, I took them the applications, not the applicants. Back to our brand new HR lady and, laughing, told her about these kids who were obviously only looking for jobs because daddy made them do it. I pointed out a sticky thumbprint on one of the applications. It was funny to me and she laughed along with me. She hired both of them on the spot. Before that point, applicants were required to have a minimum of 3 years experience in whatever field they were applying for. Neither of these kids had ever had a job before. That place went downhill rapidly under that HR manager, because she would just hire anybody she liked, which meant she only hired attractive, highly extroverted teenagers. Those 2 boys and just about everyone else that woman hired were terrible. Old parking management company HR I worked for over a decade ago just flat out ignored the second page of applications, where criminal history declarations are. For 6 months, 8 people got hired to work in private condo skyrises, where the general building master keys were in the same cabinet as resident car keys, who had felony sex offender convictions. When the district manager found out, she fired every person involved in the hiring process and moved the 8 to a parking lot. I'm lost. How does sexual felonies and cars add up? Not a hiring manager, but every time someone brought up in an interview what's the fastest anyone's been promoted here, I want to break that record. They end up being duds. Gotta get promoted so they can answer to a new boss before this one realized how big of an idiot they are. Hired a guy because he reminded me of my good friend who was addicted to OxyContin. Turned out the guy was addicted to OxyContin. Not a hiring manager, but I was a very precocious young engineer. When I was 27, I was hired as a junior engineer on a project. 3 months later, my boss, who was a great mentor, was transferred to another project overseas. For some reason his bosses decided I was ready for his job. They promoted me and my first task was to hire a replacement for my old job. HR sent over a pile of resumes that had already cleared their first hurdles. I interviewed several people and found the perfect person. He had experience in everything we wanted, and his experience in the field was with projects very close to ours. He was prompt, punctual and seemed very sharp and able to come up with workable solutions to problems very easily. Even though he was almost 50, he seemed to have no problem with a boss half his age, and in fact suggested I must be wicked smart to be so young and in charge of such a project as I was. I suggested him for our hire. My soon-to-be former boss talked to him and agreed. The head of the department agreed. HR said his credentials and everything panned out and they saw no red flags. He was hired. He signed all the papers and filled out the W-4 and we set up his desk and phone and let him know about the Friday afternoon contractor meeting and all that crap when he informed us he couldn't work Friday. We said no problem. We understand if he made plans for this Friday before he took the job. No big deal. There's next week. He said he couldn't work any Friday. He explained he was a Messianic Jew, a Jew for Jesus, and his religious views prohibited him working Friday through Sunday. This was the first I had heard about this. Nobody else saw it coming, either. We checked with HR who talked to the company lawyer. The lawyer advised that doing anything could open us up to a religious discrimination case. The lawyer said we should have asked in the interview. But isn't it illegal to ask about religion in the interview? To you ask? Yes. We should have said, we expect you to work Monday, Friday, 8 AM to 5 PM with an hour for lunch. Can you work those times? In the end, it wasn't a big deal. The guy worked longer shifts Monday, Thursday and basically did 5 days worth of work in 4 days. There were a few times we wished he were there on Friday so he could clarify something he had done for the meeting with the building contractor, but overall he worked out fine. For me though, it was a learning experience nevertheless. Sounds like it worked out. Not a hiring manager, but was evaluating applications for a position. One candidate gave some very thoughtful, insightful criticisms of his current workplace. We appreciated his candor, and the content of the critiques were perceptive. When we hired him, we realized that while he spoke well and appeared intelligent, all he could is criticize everything. Even when his criticisms made no sense. We started to see him complaining about the same things with us that he complained about in his letter, even things that were objectively false, like our vacation policy being use it or lose it, which it literally wasn't. Moral: a good candidate will find ways to frame criticisms in a positive, forward-looking way in a cover letter, not complain about their current employer. Sounds like a corporate version of the date that won't shut up about their ex. Company hired an arrogant individual who had issues everywhere he worked, both with co-workers, product and policies, supervisors, and customers. When I brought the issues up with him he seemed okay, and when I left he called upper management crying. He said I had offended him and was a racist. This was relayed to me and we had a meeting with upper management. I begged my manager to get HR involved and either look at me and see if I was racist or if he was full of it. They did not get HR involved and told me to try my best to train him up. I gave it a try and failed to get any buy-in or progress. I ended up leaving the company via headhunter for greener pastures, and after I left they transferred him to another location because they put a more inexperienced person than myself. He is now at another location doing the same thing. I have a friend with the old company and that dud of a worker has called 4 different people racist to have brought up his performance. I don't know how folks like that keep jobs. Disruptive and zero effort in any tasks. The hiring manager apologized to me when I was leaving. Candidate for supervisor position was asked about a time when they had trouble completing a task. I hate corporate interviews. Candidate mentioned something they struggled with, but the answer was that they found a way of completing the task that worked for them and did that going forward. So we kind of take that to be a big positive for thinking outside the box and being able to solve problems independently using the tools available to them. Now this was a preferred candidate, so we didn't do a lot of deep digging questions around the standard questions we were required to ask by corporate. Fast forward and candidate is now supervisor. We have a team of about 12. There is an opening checklist and a closing checklist. Supervisor struggles with learning tasks on checklist. No other team member has issue with tasks on checklist as it literally writes out what buttons you need to press. Supervisor concludes that checklist is poorly done since they cannot understand it. Proceeds to make changes to checklist master documents to the way they feel it should be done and chaos ensues. Now we have supervisor that understands checklist, about 3-4 that just press the buttons, and the rest of the team is now lost. On top of this, manager checklists have tasks that can only be done once staff has done their tasks. As a result of some of these tasks being removed from the checklist, manager tasks are no longer being done on time and everything is thrown off. When coached on this incident, supervisor did not ask trainer, teammate, or manager about how to understand the checklist and just made changes without communicating this to rest of the team. We did thank supervisor for being proactive but then worked as a team to make any necessary changes but used the original as a template. We also did some extra coaching on what they didn't understand. It took a few weeks to get everything back on track though and our scores took a hit as a result. Supervisor was up for manager position at another location. Supervisor puts on their resume revamped morning evening checklists for improved team performance. Couldn't help but chuckle at that one. Oh man. Some people can tell themselves whatever they need to hear. I didn't miss it. My boss did. And it's something I pointed out multiple times during the process. This was maybe 5 years ago. So, for context, my boss was not a very good manager, and yet he was the director of our team. He had a good work ethic, a good head on his shoulders, and always got things done not only well but on time. He was rightfully rewarded for it all. That said, he possibly has the social EQ of a fish. In my industry, you need a thick skin and the ability to kind of bulldoze through crap, people, whatever. It's heavily rampant with scumbags, fraud, etc. And it's why we get paid well. We're capable of navigating through that crap and making our companies a lot of money in the process. This guy that we were interviewing just didn't feel like a personality fit during the phone screen. Immediately after the call, I tell my boss that I'm a no. The guy isn't just going to get run over by our industry, but our own freaking team. He sounds like a great guy, but just not a fit. I get told to give him a chance. Then comes the in-person interview. It's basically all confirmed. Super nice dude. I would love to manage him in any other scenario, but not here. He just doesn't have the personality traits to succeed in our environment, which was admittedly not a good one. Boss tells me don't worry, Macabre, we can fix him. The frick? First of all, there's nothing to fix. His personality isn't crap. It's just not right for our job. 2. You're not the one managing him. I am. The dude ends up accepting our offer. Honestly, I love the guy. He's so friendly, earnest, and worked really hard because he saw the gaps in his skill sets from where he was and where he needed to be. But it took a giant toll on him, and eventually me. The guy ended up being diagnosed as clinically depressed. He hated the freaking job, and I was nowhere near experienced enough as a manager to handle something like that. When he was at his wit's end, I just told him to take a break. Start with a vacation so that he's paid, and then decide whether or not he wants to leave afterwards. Take care of himself, and to utilize me in any way he could for future prospects outside of our work. TLDR. My boss' inability to judge personalities literally sent someone over the edge into depression. I used to do hiring for a small store and the biggest red flags were too good to be true. Candidates who claimed they loved the public, never had any problems with co-workers, and were never late or absent invariably caused the biggest problems because they were lying through their teeth. We hired a guy. A couple weeks in, he got comfortable enough around me to open up about a warrant out for his arrest for sexually assaulting an underage girl, and not going to court for it. He felt pride and sneaky when telling me this. I could just tell. Had a smile and everything. Not cool, especially since I have 3 underage daughters. Told my GM. Got my boss chewed out kinda. More like, learned a lesson did we. But more importantly, got his butt fired and arrested on the spot for his next shift. Felt good. Good for you. I saw a similar story here a few weeks back and the guy caught a lot of flack for turning in the coworker. It was a maintenance type job which would have had the creep entering people's homes. You did the right thing. Oh boy, this one happened last week. Hired a guy to be a seller of cannabis products for a new dispensary I'm about to open. He was eccentric to say the least. He has tons of experience as a salesman and definitely knows his crap. In the interview he got a little bit douchy about his salary and health benefits. This is the second interview. Salary and benefits were to be discussed with the owners on the third interview. We told him this, whatever. We hired the guy, gave him his ideal salary plus commissions plus benefits. The whole package. First day he started giving me orders and asking where does he rank on the chain of command. I tell him I'm his boss and he doesn't like that so much. Whatever. Then he started giving out candy to all the females in the office and telling them I was thinking about you. Have some chocolate. I told him that wouldn't fly here and he should cool it. He told me he was a social butterfly and that I was uptight. This was all during his first week. Whatever. The very next Monday, his 6th day on the job, I get called into the owner's office with the head of human resources and they straight up asks me what I think of the guy. Turns out all of the females that got the candy from him felt heavily harassed. Dude barely lasted a week on an awesome job because he was a social butterfly. What a freaking moron. So about this job. Not so much any specific thing or any specific person, but don't ever settle for the least worst applicant. When we have an opening, we usually have HR screen the applications for basic requirements, then I go through anywhere from a dozen to 40 applications resumes. I usually do a phone screen on half a dozen or so, then invite the best 3 or 4 in for face-to-face interviews with me and the team. Every single person we've hired based on they were the best least bad of the applicant pool. Let's go ahead and make them an offer versus, wow, I really liked her. She's going to be awesome. I've always regretted hiring the least bad applicant. I've learned my lesson that hiring the least bad applicant instead of someone I'm really excited about never works out in the long run. It's much better to keep the position open a few months longer, or even close it, wait a few months, and then open it again, instead of feeling rushed to hire a warm body because they floated to the top of a mediocre applicant pool. Very true. It sucks in the short term, but it beats having to hire for that position again a few months later. I and one other of the hiring panel called it out, but our boss felt desperate for hires and pushed it through regardless. I worked in a massage clinic. This was for a therapist position. Let's discuss the red flags boss lady ignored. Applicant showed up in Daisy Dukes and rain boots and a stained hoodie. She had a long history of drug abuse. No judgments at just that. Who had gotten fired for shooting up on old work premises 6 weeks prior. She was a non-stop talker during the interview massage, working on me and others so we can see what clients would experience. She invited me to her wedding in 3 days and said that because we would be her new family we should all be there. She reeked off cigs, which is a big no-no in the industry. Confined close quarters means no sense, good, bad or otherwise. Her fingers were the worst offenders and my hair and face smelled like nicotine for the rest of the day, and every time my hair moved I got a new whiff. The biggest one was that she, completely on her own, admitted to having used doctor's notes in the past when she was on benders. I and other hiring girl, we had a panel of 5 including boss lady, which is way too freaking many, but alas, brought up our concerns. We were told she's sweet and needs a leg up, which I'm all for, but when there's red flags of fake doctor's notes and recently using on the job, it's a big issue. In our state we are on the fringe of the medical community, but we are still a part of it. So that's liability after liability right there. We had a therapist cause a seizure in a client by using essential oils not approved. We got sued up the mother effing yin yang. Using on the job and something happening to someone means the clinic closes. Big deals. Well, what happens? Luckily no lawsuits, but she started stealing and using again. She called out constantly but always had doctor's notes so she couldn't be fired. She even got a 3-month note written for a work injury. I saw it happen and literally nothing happened. But we didn't have cameras and my word wasn't as strong as a doctor. She got wind we were trying to fire her, so got a note to return to work on light duty for another 2 months. So she could basically work as much or as little as she liked and couldn't be fired. Every time she was done for the day we would have to cancel all her clients if we didn't have other therapists open. It took 11 freaking months. But then she was asked to take an extended leave so she could get better, which she did for 3 months. And then she tried to apply for unemployed benefits, which during her paperwork she fricked up and got caught trying to double dip on the company's dime, so she finally got tossed. She worked maybe 4 full weeks of work during those 11 months. Yep, we sure needed her. She really contributed. Boss lady deserves all the headaches over this hire. But the rest of us in middle management didn't deserve to deal with it. People who speak in superlatives rather than answering questions directly. Turns out the guy, while super excited to work for me, really didn't understand the role. I ended up firing him the last day of his 90-day probation period despite spending an enormous amount of time with him trying to get him right. Ran a grooming shop with my ex-wife. We hired this lady who seemed a little high-strung. Tweaky, actually, but we needed the help. Some customers swore that they recognized her from a while back at another shop, but she denied ever working there and seemed oddly defensive about it. One night, we found reviews on our Yelp page from one of her neighbors who she was fighting with. The neighbor specifically called her out in the reviews and spilled about how she was responsible for the death of a customer's dog. She walked away from the table for a break. The dog fell with the harness around its neck and hung. We fired her immediately for lying to us and bringing her drama to our business. Oh my god. I called the guy's previous job, who he had written down as a reference. His previous manager, female, explained to me how he was a great employee, but his girlfriend was freaking psycho and how she waited for her after work one night and jumped her, which is why he was fired. He explained how his manager actually had a crush on him, and when he quit she began making up lies. Not only did this not make sense, it was a red flag, on top of the red flag that he put her down as a reference at all. We were hurting for employees, so we hired him. His girlfriend was crazy, and I have many fun stories from the 5 months he worked with me. Do share. Hired a guy, said he knew electrical. We're a low budget Reno company specializing in flipping dumps. Seemed like a hump to me, but he started wiring the outlets fast. I watch him for a bit and tell him to watch for the traveler on this one switch, but it seems like it's all good, so I move on. Get back half a day later and he hasn't moved on from this switch. He'd wired the traveler wrong, and when he flipped it on, I guess it was live, the breaker blew. I set the breaker and it blows again. I ask about the traveler. Yeah, he did it right. We pull the switch apart. Nope. Right in the hot. And you know what crap happens? I'm a little mad it took 6 hours and me watching him that he started backtracking his work, but I figure everyone gets a first day pass. But then he starts to blame the other workers. They all tell him to frick off. And then, he starts to blame the evicted tenant. He must have snuck back in and switched it around. I told him to pack his crap and go, and spent the rest of the evening doing it myself. Blame the evicted tenant. I too lose sleep over the thought that somebody might have properly rewired my old home. Not a hiring manager, but I recently worked under a supervisor who had been out of the industry for several years but was trying to make a move back in. During his interviews, he apparently directed his answers only to the men in the room, even if the question was asked by a woman. They hired him anyway, and once he started, he refused to work with the women on the team, even though they knew more of the industry, since it had changed quite a bit since this guy had left. Thankfully he was let go about a year after he was hired. Oh, I got one. We had 2 interviews. Our interviews on my workplace were weird. We would have 1 hiring manager, 1 guy from the floor, 1 supervisor, and then 1 female. I was the female. The first guy comes in and is very sloppy dressed. His outfit wasn't that impressive and he stuttered a lot. His looks weren't that attractive either. I wouldn't call him ugly and he was teeter-tottering on the line of unattractive. His resume though was holy crap. Impressive as frick work history. References from all his previous jobs. Mostly management. The skills we need and then some. This guy could code, animate, fix, design, and you name it he can do it. We do the interview and despite all awkwardness aside, his resume was his one saving grace. Enter guy 2. This guy is a knockout. Dressed beautifully, wearing cologne, hair swept back, a smile on his face, and very sociable. Everyone was impressed by him. His resume, however, was not impressive. He was fresh out of college. Only work experience he had was at a Best Buy and a Costco. His references were all family members, which is fine, but this is immediate family. His skills were lackluster at best. He only put good code in JavaScript or something like that. Everyone else was impressed by him on looks like alone. We decide to give these two a final test. The first guy passes with amazing colors and we ask him if he would like to add anything to his resume for documentation, etc. He gave us a list of volunteer activities and a list of notable achievements. We looked it over and were impressed again, mostly because he did a lot of stuff raising money by playing video games. One boss was impressed. Second guy finished the test and just said he has a good feeling about it. Walked out without anything. I'm sure you know where this is going. We hired the second guy. I lost the vote 3-1, and the first guy was told he was put on file. 2 weeks later, things in the office go missing. People are more stressed as heck. And what's worse is that we all think it's this new guy. Yeah, it was. He was a womanizer and we all grew sick of his jokes and attempts to pass off his work onto us because he would say I'd owe you. By owing us he would take one of us on a date and desperately try to get into our pants. A sexual harassment suit later and he was canned. We tried calling the first guy, but he already found another job at a better company, a job I would later move to. That sucks for the first guy, but I'm glad he got a better job and you did too. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.